evolving growth models. We are going to end at 1:05, so we will start promptly. And I will abbreviate the introduction of the speakers. They are all invited to speak for 5 minutes so that we will have ample opportunity for Q&A. Another thing is that some of us will be speaking in Chinese and some of us will be speaking in English. So if you are not bilingually proficient, please put on your headphone. There is a instantaneous interpretation. This is a session on evolving growth. We have a very distinguished panel. People who have a great deal of experience on observing China's economic growth and to varying degrees are participants in setting policies and putting forward advices. Today we have, I thought I said something wrong that triggered. Dr. Edwin Lim, Dr. Li Shangchong, Professor Michael Spence, and Professor Xiao Deng. I will introduce them very briefly. Dr. Edwin Lim had been with the World Bank for an extensive period of time, particularly as representative to China, and has been involved in a great deal of the economic reform advice and research efforts as China in the past 20-odd to 30 years. Dr. Li is with the Development Research Center of the People's Republic of China and a key architect in think tank for the State Council and has extensive knowledge and experience as a participant and observer of the China's economic reform efforts. Professor Michael Spence now teaches at New York University, is chairman of the Fung Global Institute's Academic Council, and as you all know, needs no introduction, has written extensively on a wide range of subjects, particularly recent economic development in the world. Dr. Xiao Deng is a research director at the Fung Global Institute, and prior to that, he was in Beijing leading a number of China-US collaboration research activities involving Columbia University, and previously also my colleague at the University of Hong Kong. He is author of this very interesting and exciting study of the Foshan experience. So with that, let us proceed to kick off this very exciting event when just after the third plenum has convened, and which augurs well for continued reform efforts. Do we see a watershed or a consolidation as we move forward at this time? Leading the discussion is Dr. Li. Will you please give us your view of what this third plenum means for China and for our understanding of China?
It's my great honor to be here for this Asia Global Dialogue and also this session. And 我最好是用中文讲 I'm sorry. I will speak in Chinese. 因为我们这节呢是讲中国的这个改革，那么大家都知道，其实我们的三中全会的这个决定，实际上呢是按中国的话说是一个集体的结晶。为什么说呢？其实就是中国有很多的机构，其实都为这个决定呢提供了很多的原材料 raw material。所以我们刚才正像主席先生所说的，国务院发展中心呢也提供了一些这个材料。那么当然像这个国家发改委下面的宏观院、信息中心、中国社会科学院、北大、人大、清华、 还有一些国务院的其他一些机构，像国务院研究室啊，他们都提供了很多很多的材料，为这个18届三中全会的文件的撰写呢提供了很多的素材，但是就是最后的这个形成，其实呢都是要高于这些原材料的，他们是站在国家的高度，站在党的这个高度去思考这些问题。所以我现在在这说的呢，也是我个人对这个三中全会决的一些理解。因为现在大家都在这想正确的理解和执行三中全会的很多精神。那我觉得这次的三中全会呢，它一个非常重要的就是它的题目就是全面深化改革。我觉得这个全面深化呢，可能是跟过去的很多届三中全会是不一样的，因为像过去的有一些三中全会呢，它是有一些专题的，比如说是关注于农业的改革，关注于市场经济的治理，但是这次呢是更加注重全面和深化。那么实际上这个也是就是说，经过35年的，从1978年到现在35年的改革呢，其实在最近这些年，大家都希望中国的改革能够往前进一步的推进。那么未来的7年到底怎么走法？我觉得是基于过去35年的经验呢，做一个很全面的总结，而且全面的去思考下一步的这个行动，是吧？这个是，这是一个特点。另外一个呢，其实，它有一个很重要的一个内容，就是，关于要推进这个国家治理体系和能力的现代化。那么因为原来呢，我们在很多地方都讲的是管理，那么现在呢，它用的不是管理，用的是治理。那么用这 governance 这个字呢，它就跟那个管理呢是不一样的。管理嘛，往往是说我政府的一个主体在管理，但是现在这样的治理的话呢，它是讲是多元的这种多元的主体来参加，包括有政府、有市场，还有一些社会组织，还有像我们这个中国现在的这种体制下的人大政协这样一个多元的一种治理。那么还有一个呢，就是它原来说管理的话呢，它往往只是说一种行政性的。那么现在说到这个治理的话呢，它就更就是着重于用法治这种方式来治理这个整个的国家。所以这个三中全会其实有很多这个亮点啊，所以我在这里呢只是谈这2点，我觉得是非常重要的。那么我这个发言呢，也就是一个抛砖引玉。Thank you。
谢谢李博士。我们等一会儿才一并发言，现在我们请下一位讲者。Let me introduce Dr. Edwin Lim to be the next speaker for this panel, and then following that, after, please hold your Q&A after the panel has spoken. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just make a few points, and maybe we have a better time to have question and answer, because the subject is extremely broad. Okay, it's on already. The subject is extremely broad, and we can't possibly cover it. Your interest, then we can discuss specific topic. But to begin with, I would certainly recommend that all of you should have received this. This is the PwC summary. There have been many summaries, but I find this really very good. The translation is also very good. And so if you're interested in the decision, this is certainly something that you should have a look at. It really is, the decision itself is very long. It's 20,000 word Chinese. But this summarizes it very well. But what doesn't come through in here is, the first point I'll make, is that the sum is much greater than the parts. If you look at it overall, it is really a very impressive program for reform. It really is a building of a new economic systems, and as Dr. Li Santong mentioned, a new governance. Not for the word governance has been used in China, for example, mainly for corporate governance and the micro business. But you see the decision, it's all about the governance of the country and the governance of the government, as well as governance of the university even. I mean, I was very interested to see that because, as you know, that there have been a lot of problems with some of the universities, including Renda recently, and so Rendaje recently. So I think it covers governance in all respects. The second point I would want to make is that reading through the decision, you see that the decision to introduce very fundamental reform comes from a realization that China is in great deal of difficulty in many respects in its attempt to try to develop a new growth model, which is considered to be necessary for the country to transition to high income. In dealing with some of the social issues, and we have seen the last few years, despite the effort to build a so-called harmonious society, in fact, a great deal of social tension has arisen. And specifically, I think there's a great deal of unhappiness about hukum, unfairness. It's not, I think with the market economy, most Chinese would agree that inequality in outcome should be accepted. But what is not acceptable is inequality in opportunity. And finally, of course, which has been receiving a lot of attention, is corruption. And I think corruption in the Chinese phrase, fubai, really means a lot more than corruption. It means abuse of power, it means rent-seeking, and so on. And there's a great deal of dissatisfaction. So this decision arises from an analysis of the difficulty and challenges that China faces today. The third point I would want to make is that this is only, it's called a roadmap here, which is a good phrase. It's only the beginning, and I think implementation is going to be very difficult. Because unlike 1979, there are already a lot of vested interests, there are a lot of agencies and individuals who are benefiting greatly from the semi-reform process. And so there will be a lot of resistance for the deepening of reform. And one has to see how strong and how effective the Communist Party leadership can be. So that's, that's all I want to say. And then if you have any question that we can answer this area. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Lim. May I invite the next speaker, Dr. Xiaogen, to give us his observations and insights.
Well, the decision, it took me 2 days to go through the 20,000 Chinese characters. I read it very carefully, and it comes out for me is like a description about what we call the China growth model. So many people talk about the China's growth model, but this is the really very comprehensive and coherent description about the future China's future growth model. And for me, from my reading is that the leaders have made decision. Basically, China needs to go all the way to the market, and it is focusing on the institutions which will govern the market in the future. And for me, it's like in 10 years' time, if this is implemented fully, then there will be very little gaps in terms of the institutions governing the market. However, I also find out that there is a clear difference between the institutions in China and institutions, or for example, countries like the U.S. or European countries, right? And there, the documents also has a lot of description, and so for me, it's like an innovative response to all the challenges the leader sees to China at this moment. So this links very well to the discussion this morning we had on innovation. Jean Pascal, said that what is innovation? Innovation is really trying to deal with the constraints, the challenges. And the way I see the documents, the Third Plenum results is really the way they try to deal with all the unbalanced, unsustainable, uncoordinated, conditions in China. And then the second point I want to make is that we have been doing this research on Foshan, a Chinese city. We are focusing on the growth model. So it took us a year to try to understand a city. And you can get a report in there, and when I read the party documents, it's very surprising to me, the issues they are trying, the way they're trying to deal with the problems is actually very consistent with, if any of our research in our team want to come up with any constructive recommendation, then those recommendations are all consistent with the central government, like this document. That was really very surprising to me. Yeah, and that comes to the point I want to make is that that document is a result of, I think, hundreds of case studies, field trips, and all the hierarchies of Chinese officials. They did their homework, and they also did their integration, and they come up with a document which I think is better than any textbook available in study how the growth model of developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shao. And Professor Michael Spence, your observations?
Thank you. Well, it's fun to be here with you. I think all of us are wrestling with the magnitude of this thing, so I'll just follow the lead and make some observations. Any reform program that I've ever seen, particularly in the developing country context, has two parts. One is the government gets to stop doing things that are either destructive or adversely affect performance. And we often forget about that aspect of it. And then the second is to start doing things that are designed to support the continued growth and development of the economy. This document is very comprehensive and does, slightly, by implication sometimes, some of these things. So I interpret the statement that the market is going to have a decisive role. It means that the government is going to stop overusing its power with respect to market access, massive purchasing and other things that all governments have, and let the markets, sort of compete and decide. So that's point one. Point two, there is the risk of sounding like a broken record, but I'll say it again. This document is clear to me on the supply side of the economy. The structure looks like it is flexible and will change. I believe that the innovation agenda will be furthered. It's very important by the promotion of competition. But this is an economy where the composition of aggregate demand has shifted so far over toward investment, pushing it at the margin into negative return territory, and that the system is set up to do that. So a lot of these reforms are designed to sort of cause that to change over time. For example, financial sector development, if properly done, will raise the rates of return to savers, eliminate a certain dimension of financial repression, and if it's fully built out, it will intermediate flows of equity and credit to where it's supposed to be, and equally important, stop the flows of credit to where it shouldn't be, namely in low return territory, either on the private or the public side. I believe that the reformers, this very large group of people that were named before, understand all this. But it is still true that household income is below 60% of national income in China, and the savings rate is running about 30%. So most people's estimate of consumption, even though there may be issues with the data, is that it's at or below 40%. That's not even within shooting distance measured in standard deviations from any other country in the world. And so when you think about this aspect, this, you know, an economy is driven in the short and medium run by where this demand lies and whether it's adequate. They're going to cut back on the low return investment. I think it'll stay a high return investment environment. Somehow the household sector is going to kick in, but something has to happen to move a larger fraction of national income in that direction. And so I think one of the things you're going to have to watch as we go forward is whether or not the finance minister's reconfiguration of the fiscal structure, the dividend policies of the SOEs, which have been up to, I think, 30%, and a bunch of other things happen that move this aspect of the evolving growth model in that direction. And I think on social inclusion and environmental things, which are, you know, sometimes treated as add-ons, but are actually probably pretty important in terms of maintaining sort of social cohesion and whatnot. I don't have any reason to doubt the seriousness of this. I think there is a reference in the document that Edwin mentioned to paying very close attention to the incentive structures that are built in. So I don't, you know, this will be my last comment. I think it's, you know, it's fine to say that we're going to kind of fix some of these problems, but unless the officials in Foshan and other cities are incentivized in what remains a relatively corporate structure, in terms of evaluations and performance metrics and other things, to actually undertake some of these things, maybe some local input, you know, of a kind of democratic kind, then those things will tend to get pushed back as they have in the past. I mean, my last sentence, my friends in Beijing say, Chinese people will read this, they'll think this is pretty comprehensive, they'll say, I've heard some of these words before, and so I'm going to wait and see what happens in the next year when the, you know, work program that's developed this month and then the real, you know, implementation starts. And I think that's a kind of sensible, slightly skeptical, cautiously optimistic stance at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is actually now open to everyone to, you know, raise questions to any of the speakers or for that matter, our time now. Anyone?
It's going to be the shorter session.
Well, shorter session is so certainly going from traditional society to modernity is to enhance complexity, and yet you need to solve problems by unbundling very complex problems. The market is one of those institutions, but starting with a very dominance of the state, letting that happen is not easy, but they have done quite a miraculous achievement in the first 30 years. What's next? Yeah, question over there at the back.
My question to the panel is how much does the program of the Third Plenum tap into the study done by the Center and by the World Bank on China 2030? Is that a precursor of what happened, or is that part of the program which is going to be developed and used for implementation of what was decided at the plenum?
Anyone? Edward?
I think it is very little to do with that study. It was very specific that there are two very major documents that have come out of China. One is the 12th Five-Year Plan, and that addresses the development strategy. And it was quite deliberate that this document would focus on reform and not development policies. Now, the World Bank China 2030 study, which was on DRC, was really very encyclopedic analysis of the economy, and it's an enormously useful reference document. If you want to know about rural pension, You can search and you get a very good analysis of real passion. But it's not a document of strategy. I mean, this is very Chinese. The origin of this is China. It's a Communist Party Central Committee document. And I don't think, despite the effort of some people, like the ex-president of the World Bank, who tried to claim credit for that, I think the China 2030 study has very little to do with this. Now, DRC, the institution that collaborated with the World Bank on that study, has been very much involved in the preparation of this program. As Li Shantung said, they have conducted a study on reform priorities, which has fed into this reform program. At least that's my understanding.
Yeah, could I just add one thing? What the 12th five-year plan did, and to some extent a number of other documents, is describe the changing growth pattern. That is the thing that will work at this level of income in multiple dimensions. It doesn't tell you how to get there. What this document is starting to do is to tell you what changes in the way government acts and incentivizes actual reforms. I mean, this is going to come in tiers, but this is part two, is what are we going to do that puts the state in the position of supporting the rather massive changes that go with that changing growth pattern, okay? And they get muddled together every now and then, right? But it's actually a two-step process. First figuring out what'll work and what's supposed to happen, and then figuring out how you're going to get there.
Yeah, I think put this way, when we started our research a year ago, we actually our objective is to really understand how China is going to deal with all its problems, and we pick up a city, in one of the best cities, in Guangdong, Foshan, and our question is that, basically, if Foshan, the best city, among the best, cannot deal with these problems, there's no way China, the rest of China, can deal with it. So that's actually the way we started, And my understanding is that that's a question for a lot of research institutions and also a lot of regions. They're all dealing with this problem. How to deal with this problem, And so, and as we are trying to study this problem, we identify that the relationship between this government and the market is really the key. Mike remembers that. That's really, we decided almost, a year ago, right? And as we are doing the research, because we actually work also with the researchers from Beijing, from NDRC, right? So we have many rounds of discussions, few trips and debates, and that, I think, it happens not just in our institution, but also in DRC, in other institutions. And I think that shows the process of learning, the Chinese systems is mobilizing all the research institutions, and trying to find out ways, how to deal with this problem. And to our surprise, when we studied Foshan, we thought this is a good city, but actually towards the end of the study, we actually discovered that the city is actually performing so well. A city of 7 million population, is already have per capita GDP $15,000, higher than in Shanghai. And also the city has more than 50% of migrants, and that's why the city treats the migrants pretty well, because otherwise the 2/3 of the labor force are from outside. If you don't treat them well, you cannot retain them. And also, even on the investment, we actually discovered at last minute, the fixed capital investment in Foshan kept like around 30%, very stable. But for the whole country, it went up and up to almost 60%, 70%, which Mike mentioned, that's a terrible problem for the country as a whole, right? So, and then we look at how Foshan get there. And we actually found out that it's really the market. But it's not just the market, it's the local government, they're transformed from substituting for the market to supporting the development of the market. That was really crucial, you know. I mean, in the early years, they basically returned all the taxes and the fees to the villages and the districts and townships. Say, okay, why don't you keep this taxes and fees, and then build the local markets? And as a result, a city in Foshan, they have more than 30 industrial clusters based on the townships, you know. So that all reflects the importance of the market. And for us, we were just excited as a scholar, you know, how the market emerged, right? But when we read the documents, you know, how the party is going to change the whole country, you know, and you decide that the market is a decisive force to allocate resources. That was exciting to us because that's really consistent with the local experiences.
我想呢，刚才这个问题呢，我想再说两句啊。刚才林先生已经对这个问题做了一个回答。我再以我的理解来看这件事情，因为这个 China in 2030这个研究呢是世界银行和我们国务院发展中心合作研究的。所以这个我觉得它的这个刚才正如林先生讲的，它是很全面的给出了中国现在发展的这个现状和未来的很多的挑战。所以如果说你要想理解中国的经济，那我觉得这本书呢是给了非常好的一个这个资料性的。但是呢，其实它对发展问题讲的可能更多一些。对改革问题呢，其实它不是专门只针对这个改革问题来做的。正像我今天刚才所说的，就是实际上呢，这个对三中全会其实是很多单位都做了很多研究。比如说，现在这个大家经常说的，国务院发展中心所做的383，就是 383。其实那个383呢，我说它只是一个给三中全会提供了一个基础的原材料，但是实际上呢，没有原材料我们做不好最好的产品。但是呢，这个最后的 final goods 跟那个原材料呢，实际上还是有很大的差别的。所以实际上呢，这个我刚才说，我说这个三中全会的文件实际上是一个集体结晶，不光是国务院发展中心的，还有发改委的，还有这个各个大学的，中国社会科学院的很多机构共同提供的。那么实际上呢，我知道林先生，他不光是对12国组织一些专家提了很多很好的意见，那么对改革，其实我觉得好像也做了很好的一些建议。比如说，我记得今年3月份在钓鱼台开有一个会，是吧？就是组织了很多世界的各个专家来对中国的改革提出很多意见。所以我觉得这些都是做了很多贡献，很难说哪个就是起的最重要。最重要的，我觉得还是中央的，就是这种就是高层的领导，他们可能决定哪些东西他要，哪些东西他不要，那个可能是更重要的。好，谢谢。
There was a question back there.
If I may refer to your Fusan study again, I think in your study you certainly elaborated about some of the driving forces that has sort of led Fusan to develop to its present stage. My question is, it seemed to me that the main driving force still, or one of the main driving forces, still has been this light manufacturing industrial base. And I think in your reports, you also cite examples of, for example, small appliances, so on and so forth, and porcelain manufacturing and all that. that sort of industrial base, do they feel threatened looking into the future? Because we all know that in the Pearl River Delta, we're all faced with various amount of challenges, the rising labor costs, and so on and so forth. I do not know how much export-oriented is driving that industrial base, but if that, as the rest of the country, is relying heavily on that, that is also a cause of concern. So, in the longer term, in your study, has Fusan mapped out a different course of development rather than based on light industrial manufacturing and perhaps even on exporting alone?
Okay, before you let me, in light of time, are there questions that are related to this so you can ask at the same time and then so the panel can respond as they collect? No. Okay. Yes? Question? In the middle. Yeah, gentleman there. Raise your hand, please.
Coming from Japan, this might be a rather unappropriate question because we seem to discuss more about the domestic affairs rather than international. In 1980s and the 1990s, the Chinese government has really encouraged Japanese investment into China. And most of the automobile company, for instance, came to China. But then recent years, we had this political tension over the island. And that seems to create a rather unpleasant environment. And some of the companies being looted and striked, and they suffered considerably. And I was wondering that in the future, I mean, Foshan is very much local matters, but I think China needs a foreign investment. But I think if the government takes that kind of politicized policy for foreign investors, I think we would be very, very worried about our future. And in fact, a lot of manufacturing companies went to Vietnam and Myanmar and Thailand and so forth. What is your kind of a feeling in the future for foreign investors? That's my question.
Any other related to this question?
I will answer the first question. First, yes, Foshan actually is facing with all kind of challenges, especially when the labor costs, cost of land is rising, and the industries has to upgrade. But I would say that our research did not actually give any future options recommendations. What we have found out is actually that the Foshan has always been faced with challenges. It's a city, it's not a special economic zone, it's not a big city, capital city of province. It has no natural resources, there's no way to have monopoly, there's no large state-owned companies there, So it's a city really, even 35 years ago, we're faced with all kinds of challenges. And what we have found is that the people, the local governments, the companies, they are constantly trying to innovate, they're trying to find ways to survive. And the thing is, the Foshan is very lucky because it is located so close to Hong Kong. And also it started reform so early, And one critical reform is the decentralization of local autonomy. You know, they all the way decentralized to the village, township, and district level. And as a result, the municipal government actually their fiscal revenue is only 18%. You know, declining from like I mean, usually the municipal government will have majority of fiscal income for other cities. So, and also it is a city which we transformed from a net export as high as 30% of GDP to 18% of GDP today. You know, 10 years ago, 30%. And then the neighboring city like Dongguan, another city, they are continue to stay at the 35% net export as the share of GDP. So in that sense, you know, that's why I mentioned earlier, the innovation comes from challenging, from constraints. When you have no option, then you have to do innovation. And I think foresight is actually a case of innovation. But the performance of foresight is very difficult to replicate in the sense that because there's a lot of advantages, the location, you know, and also the long history of culture. You know, foresight is one of the oldest cities in China. So that's the first question. The second question, I think if look at the track record and also look at the documents, actually my view is that China will treat the foreign investment basically the same, you know, and also will be more open, because what the practice and the document is trying to do is really to converge the institutions towards the international practice. That's the essence. And also China is already so open. You know, there are so many Japanese cars running in Foshan and any other city. You know, and it's really hard to you know, change that. You know, I mean, even though there are political disputes, you know, all these kind of disputes, I think it's not really, for me it's noise. It's not the main you know, the trend.
Yeah, maybe let me just say on the specific question of foreign investment. I will just quote here from the PwC summary of the Third Plenum decision. Equal treatment for foreign enterprises with barrier to sectors lowered or removed. The Plenum has vowed to build a unified, fair and open market system where domestic and foreign companies will enjoy equal rights, equal opportunities, and equal rules.
Question here. Raise your hand.
Thank you. Mendel Karakulcu from Istanbul, Turkey. I'm going back to the aggregate demand problem and trying to sort of project going forward what the headwinds are and tailwinds are. The urbanization trajectory seems to be proceeding. It will go on. Is that, I mean, do we have any empirical work? Does that imply something about the aggregate demand? The other one is aging seems to be one of those fundamental forces. How does that interact with aggregate demand? And the third one is, do we have anything in the new policy structure that says something about a public assumption of social security that could impact aggregate demand? So I'm basically trying to figure out how, when we look at aggregate demand going forward, how it could evolve given the context. And one thing I'm curious about, this is a separate issue, is we are talking about a repressed financial system, hence low interest rates. Given the immense volume of capital accumulation, if we were to liberate financial markets, would we actually get higher interest rates? I mean, is there so much inefficiency in the investment structure that there would be this boom of unexploited investment opportunities? I'm just curious about that.
Michael?
Yeah, no, so I'll try to be very brief. I think you hit the main items. So there's one more tailwind, which is that wages started to rise about 2 years ago, very rapidly. In the Pearl River Delta, about 15–20%. So that's a huge thing. Before that started to happen, the general commentary among people who were paying attention to this was that wise and important investments in the area of social services and social security might be the bridge, while this other stuff kicks in. And urbanization will surely drive, done right, will drive a considerable amount of investment that is high return and necessary and drive aggregate demand. There's a lot of talk about aging. I actually don't think, that may slow growth, just because of the demographics do that to you, but that's not a bad thing. What's a bad thing is when the institutions and programs are out of sync with the demographics. So that's the situation we have in Europe and most of the advanced countries, where we have pension systems that were designed, for a time when people retired at, say 60 and lived to 72, and now they're living to 88. I'm exaggerating slightly, but those things aren't exactly in balance financially. But I don't think China's at that point. In fact, the Chinese authorities are being pretty careful about instituting social security systems that create long-term liabilities that are larger than, that is, they don't know how to exactly calculate the liability, so they're being very careful about that. The bottom line is, the other key piece of this is right now, if households don't control as much income as they do in other countries, then you can ask the question, who controls it? And the answer is the corporate sector, broadly defined, and the government. And one of the things that will happen over time is that mix will shift. And embedded in this system now, given deficits in sort of financial market discipline and corporate governance, is a tendency, when you've retained all these earnings, to just invest them. And sometimes that's a good investment, and sometimes it's property speculation, and the reforms are targeted to get rid of that, and eventually get the incomes over to the household side. I think it's doable, but I actually think that the senior people in Beijing are prepared to accept a lull in the growth next year, if they pull back on the things they shouldn't use, like leverage and whatnot, and wait for these other things to kick in.
Yes, question there.
It seems that the general reaction to the proposal is good, that it's a very well thought out program, that it hits most of the right issues, and that the solutions proposed are pretty sensible. So the issue becomes, when you're looking at it from the outside, is implementation. How realistic is this? And if we're looking at this in 2 or 3 years' time, it's not, first of all, it's going to take time to do. I guess it would be unrealistic to assume it's going to be 100% implemented in 100% places. We're looking at it in 2 or 3 years' time. Are there sort of key factors that we should be following? And if so, what are they? That says to us, yeah, basically this is on track.
Our attempt always is a very big question, and at the end of the day, it's always implementation, isn't it? But you have to see it in the political terms. It's basically the program of the new leadership, and that's 10 years. In the decision itself, it has said the basic accomplishment by the year 2020. And so that's the time frame. But I think the correct time frame is the tenure of the current leadership, which is 10 years. And they're setting out their agenda. In terms of steps, China moved fast. As you know, last weekend already, the CSRC announced the new IPO process, that it will no longer be based on approval, it will be based on registration. And I think those of you in the investment banking business will know that's there's a sea change. That you no longer go and get approval, there will be rules set out, and as long as you follow the rule, you register, you're ready for your initial public offering. Mike, I think, mentioned a couple of major meetings coming up this month. One is the economic meeting for setting out the plan for next year. At the same time, also a bit later in the month, there's a big conference on urbanization, where they will formulate urbanization plan. And it would be interesting to see what that urbanization conference come out in terms of the two key policy that's in the decision. One is land use, land market, and the other one is PUCO, the population policy. And I think those will be addressed, I would expect, will need to be addressed in those. So, you know, China, I mean, you should see progress, or at least indicator quickly, but nonetheless, you're absolutely correct. Changing an entire way the economy and the society function takes time. I mean, it involves a lot of cultural change also, the behavior. I mean, there's a wonderful phrase in the decision which says that the power of party and government official will now have a light shine on them, and the power will be subject to a cage that will be built up by rules. Those are really pretty powerful, metaphor. So, it will take time, but you will see indicators. It is so broad. I mean, in many areas, we should be able to see indicators of how things are going. But this is, I think, the PwC domain. It is roadmap, and we should follow closely what is happening. And I hope friends of China, businesses, and so on will respond to this intention to transform the Chinese economy.
Anyone on the panel?
Very quickly. You see, the way I think we should look is actually look at, we listed in our paper the 17 cities, what we call pioneering cities. Of course, including Shanghai, Beijing, the Tianjin, the city, also Foshan. Because those are the cities where a lot of reforms they already completed. Like the land reform, which we proposed in the Third Plenum, Foshan already has been doing this for many years. And some of the reforms, like the Shanghai Free Trade Zone, that will be quickly implemented. And so I think the way to look at the China, and also Chinese policy is look at this pioneering cities, because these cities are attracting population. The 17 cities has already 11% of China's population and 30% of China's GDP. So these are really driving the entire Chinese economy. It's a restructuring, including the geographic change in population, and also the industries, including also the ecology. We have to watch these pioneering cities.
Sorry，我觉得那个刚才提的问题非常重要，因为我觉得就是写这个制定这个整个的这个18届三中全会的决定是一个我们说是一个很复杂的系统工程，其实实施我觉得是更复杂，因为它实际上它定的是到2020年是7年的这样一个整个的这个时间段。那么我觉得这里面呢，实际上我们看，其实最可实施的、最简单的一个事儿就是，比如说生育政策。那么生育政策其实我知道我们学术界已经讨论了10年了，那么到最后决定就是放开，但是放开实际上大家可以看到还有很多争论，到底是放开2胎呢，还是放开2孩儿？就是第2个孩子呢，还是说第2胎？所以这个还有好多就是在实施过程中间呢，其实情况是更复杂的。所以我觉得它的这个实施呢，是一个对我们政府的执行力来讲是一个很重要的一个考验。那么其实我觉得对于这个三中全会的决定啊，实际上我有时候读它时候呢，像一个 matrix，因为你比如说这个 PwC 的这个他所做的这个什么，它实际上是用一个题目是吧，然后呢看一下从三中全会能得到什么。比如说城市化，那我们看到就是说在城市化这个问题呢，在三中全会的标题里面， 在它的那个条文里边并没有明显的说出来。但是呢，实际上我们看到跟城市化相关的呢，可能是有很多条，比如说在生态文明中间也讲到这个城市的这个布局问题，是吧？在这个规划体系中间也讲到这个城市化的问题。所以就是说，如果我们读这个的话呢，它实际上呢，对每一项具体的东西要实施的话呢，实际上我们去就是要从那个就是这种矩阵式的理解，从横着看、竖着看来解决这个问题。所以我觉得这个下面的实施，可能我觉得是一个也非常重要，也是非常复杂的一个这个系统工程啊。
谢谢。We still have little time for one or at most two questions. So please show your hands who wants to speak. Okay. Lady here.
你好，我想问一下普通话，问一下李女士，我想请问一下，就是关于这个，我很认同这个改革，需要经济改革，还有这政治的改革。所以请问一下，刚才讲的这个三中全会开完之后，整个政治架构怎么样支撑整个改革的流程？还有尤其是在这个法律方面呢，还有其他现在要做现代服务业等等其他的方面，它怎么样可以改革这个流程？然后第二个，请问一下这个刚才在我们论坛上面谈到这个多边政策，其实现在这自贸区还有全部的经济特区会不会就是跟这个也是应对这个多边政策在国际上，中国怎么样从三中全会里边怎么样面对整个世界经济的局面？谢谢。
Anyone on the panel? I think Dr. Lee, you have been asked to elaborate.
其实我觉得，在这个文件呢，那个它实际上呢，它的重点是经济体制改革。它当然设计方面有经济的、政治的、文化的、社会的、生态的和这个党的建设，但是它中心的这个重点实际上是经济体制改革。所以我们觉得它这个对这个我们觉得要把握好，它不是一个就是好像要涉及到一个什么政治体制。我觉得关键的是重点把经济体制给它搞得更好一些。这是一个，另外一个就是，那么其实我们觉得它，三中全会的决定，它其实给出了很多是那个方向性的，是吧？就是 roadmap 这样的性质。但是呢，你比如说像自贸区的这个建设问题，实际上它可能现在提出来了，但是呢，它在实施过程中间呢，可能是要根据情况的不断的去要再去就是来实施。比如说在上海，究竟这个世贸区、这个自贸区，它怎么来开放，是吧？因为它这个开放可能跟过去这个商品市场的开放是不一样的。那么在这个就是服务业的开放这过程中间，到底怎么来这个什么的话，我觉得有很多政策或者措施呢是需要进一步细化的。所以我觉得这个三中全会现在的决定呢，只是在很多地方给了一个方向性的一个大的原则的东西。我们具体的实施呢，可能还是要再细化这些具体的政策。
I would just add one point. I think if you read Xi Jinping explanation, 说明 about the third party, you see that he specifically said that many measures will have to be translated into law and submitted to the People's Congress. So that would be also another occasion, is the next People's Congress in March, but over the years also. So, I mean, if the commitment is to a law and rule-based government and economy, then many of the reform measures will have to be translated into laws and regulation over time.
Thank you. One last question. Okay. Yes, gentleman here in the middle.
Thank you. My name is Sakuma. I'm from Japan. I understand that plenum said that letting market a very decisive role. And to my sense, market means the collective form of individual, no matter private person or corporate. And if the reform was such in economic front go ahead and successfully, that could affect the political landscape of China too. I mean, otherwise, each individual entity would play very irresponsible manner. Well, in the worst case, I'm afraid. So what is your feeling of this kind of the economic reform? How that could change, could affect the current system of political landscape?
Would economic reform change the political transition to something different?
The second part of what you said is, I think, not a problem. I mean, this is a rules-based system. You know, if the rules are right, it will constrain behavior and get markets to do good things. And as George Akerlof said, you know, deal with. I mean, markets are pretty good at exploiting opportunities. They're also pretty good at exploiting vulnerabilities. So the reason markets are constrained by regulatory and legal structure is to prevent the second, and the Chinese reformers understand that. I think that's one of the reasons that Dr. Lee and Edwin emphasized the rules-based system and whatnot. Nobody knows what's going to happen in China, but so I thought I'd answer that question in the following way. Japan, Korea, and the Taiwanese subpart of China, and a number of other cases, were all single, well, Korea was at one point, you know, an autocratic system. The rest were dominant single parties, where the political electoral structure was put together in such a way that it was a near certainty that the same party would be elected over and over again. Every single one of those cases and a number of others has evolved somewhere in the middle to high income transition into multi-party democracies. Now that doesn't tell you what's going to happen in China, but it tells you that when you have a big rising middle class, there are pressures on the political system to adapt. And indeed, the Chinese political system, in a you know, by external standards, in an unconventional way, is adapting. It's adapting at the local level. It's adapting in terms of the consultative structure within the overall party structure. So, without knowing where it's going to end up or on the exact timing, I think the one bad bet to place is that it will look exactly the way it does now 10 years from now. That seems, based on case studies of other countries, to be reasonably unlikely.
Anyone want to add to that? Panel? Well, I still have 5 minutes before we wrap up. I'm not going to take more questions, but I'm going to invite the panel to say if there are missing things that you actually wanted to say but have not had the chance, this is the time before we break up. Dr. Shaw?
Just want to add a point that Xi Jinping, when President Xi explains the plan, he actually says that what in Chinese called Dao Bi. They say that they're going to actually leverage on the pressures from outside to push reforms, internal reforms, which is I think comes from China's own experience. You know, from WTO. When China joins WTO, you know, it looks like very threatening, but in fact it pushed a lot of reforms. So that's I think also this morning, even our friends from Japan also mentioned that. You know, the TPP is actually seen as a way to push domestic reforms. So I just want to add this point.
Well, thank you very much. Michael? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We still have 3 minutes.
I'll use 30 seconds. Xiaogang has sort of answered this question about Foshan a little bit, but Foshan is unusually focused in its manufacturing sector on the domestic economy. The data he described, you know, indicates that, but it's pretty clear that they're not as exposed to the reduced growth potential from the external demand, meaning the export sector, than much of the rest of the Pearl River Delta and a number of other parts of China. It's very innovative, and it's going to be, it's not impossible that foreign products could come in the very labor-intensive category and compete with them, but by then they'll be way, way up the value-added chain. And it looks to me like it was pretty far-sighted to get focused on this large, growing domestic market. The one other thing I wanted to add is, one of the things that worried the people who were putting together the 12 5-year plan, it was the question of what is going to be the employment engine for the, just under 50% of the population that still lives in rural areas, the part that's going to go to urban areas. And the old answer to that used to be the export sector. Well, that isn't going to be the answer anymore, right, for obvious reasons. I mean, the incomes are up too high, and that's not where low-skilled people are going to go. So part of the answer is a concerted effort to educate and train, vocationally train people. But the real answer to the question, where's this employment engine going to come from? It's going to come from the growing urban service sector. There's going to be literally tens of thousands of companies created. And I mention that because a good chunk of these reforms, more market, a financial system that allows you to open and scale a business that does not disadvantage small and medium-sized businesses with respect to access to equity and credit, and all of that stuff, in the end, is designed to allow the supply side of that service sector to grow like a weed and be the employment engine. And if that doesn't work, there's going to be trouble socially. So that part has to work if this is going to succeed.
Thank you very much. I think we are time's up. And thank you very much for attending this session. This is obviously an exciting time, and it is great that we had a good dialogue. I would like you all to thank the panel, Dr. Lim, Dr. Lee, for engaging with us. Thank you very much. It is lunch networking time.